Hello everyone. I hope you're all having a good evening, and thanks Ed for inviting me to speak again tonight. My name is Mike Hall. I'm a freelance illustrator and mapmaker from the UK, and I live in Valencia in eastern Spain. Some of you may already be familiar with my work. For those who aren't, I create all kinds of maps for a range of clients, ranging from detailed touristy maps to simpler decorative maps for books and publishers, as well as developing my own design ideas in my spare time, some of which I make available to purchase online. One thing I'm sure I have in common with everyone participating tonight is a fascination with maps, which I've always loved them, and I've always been creating them pretty much for as long as I've been able to hold a pencil. The majority of my work is created digitally, though I still produce some work in traditional media. A couple of examples that you see here, for example, the map of Tudor London here on the top left, and this fantasy view of an Italian town for a publisher at the bottom right. But tonight I'm going to tell you all about a bit about some of the maps of the country and the city that I've called home for nearly 7 years. So I'd like to start with this design, which is one of the first I completed soon after my arrival here in Spain in the autumn of 2014. So this is based on the book called As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning, and it's by the British poet Laurie Lee, who I don't think is so well known these days, but it's a fantastic book which I strongly recommend. And it's an account of his journey that he took on foot as a young man across Spain in the mid-1930s, immediately prior to the outbreak of the Civil War. And it depicts his journey on foot from Galicia, all the way in the far northwest corner, to Almuñécar on the south coast of Andalusia, traveling through cities like Segovia, Madrid, Toledo, on through Córdoba, Sevilla, and Malaga. Now, the general look and style of this particular map was strongly influenced by several things. I think primarily by these maps, which some of you, I'm sure, must be familiar with in the Plaza de España in Sevilla, which are very elaborate decorative maps of each of these Spanish provinces. And also the decoration scheme as well. There's some inspiration taken from traditional Spanish tile patterns, a couple of examples which can be seen here. Oops. And so not long after completing that first map, I became fixated on the idea of creating a much larger, more elaborate design of the modern day country. And this is a sketch that I created at the end of 2015. And this is the resulting map that took about 2 years to complete. And it shows how I've expanded the detail quite considerably, certainly more illustrations dotted around the edge of the decoration scheme as well. So it's a design which I return to now and again in my spare time, really, over the course of 2 years. And I think it's a good demonstration as well of the way in which I like to play with the image of the map of Spain on a sheet of paper. You know, the way that they have that square mass of the Iberian Peninsula, the way it fills a horizontal sheet of paper, and the way it's divided into regions of roughly equal size as well. Just scrolling through some close-up details, you see here how I really went to town with the topographical detail. And you see here as well, these shields that dot the map's edge represent each autonomous community. So Asturias, Castilla y León, Galicia, Navarra, País Vasco, and all the rest. This reflects my interest in including things like heraldic symbols and traditional imagery in my designs. And this is a detail of the title cartouche. I think cartouche is probably one of my favorite words, I think. And this features the coat of arms or escudo of the Kingdom of Spain. So you can see as well how I really wanted to emulate a certain style based on 17th, 18th century atlas prints as well. And then moving on to maps of the region where I live, which is the Comunidad Valenciana, or the Valencian community, or the Valencian country, as some might prefer to call it. And this is in turn composed of three provinces: Alicante in the south, you have Castellón in the north, and in Valencia in the center. And here I also applied this a similar concept of a decorative antique style to a map of the region. The example on the left-hand side is the original version, in which I included some illustrations in the corner. So at the top left, we have Morella in Castellón, we have Altea on the Costa Brava at the bottom right, Alicante, and then also a view of the bell tower in Valencia, Cathedral in Valencia. But then I realized that less is more. I wanted to allow a bit more breathing space around the design. I decided to eschew those illustrations to create a relatively simpler design with a lighter color palette as well. And in the end, that's the design on which I settled. And a couple of close-up detail here. You can see how I've been very careful to use native Valencian spelling of all the names and labels. But to be honest, one thing I've learned during my forays into creating maps of Spain is that representations of regional languages can be quite a thorny subject among certain people. But I try my best, all in good faith. And also another detail here of the area around Alicante. Lovely part of the world as well, by the way, lovely coast. So then following that, I also became interested in creating similar kind of style maps of the province itself in which I live, Valencia. This is an example from, this is from a 1920s Atlas of Spain, which I actually picked up at a flea market for a bargain here in Valencia. And the style of these maps in this atlas proved to be quite influential. I think certainly you can see there's a real distinctive style about these maps. And I guess I didn't quite want to emulate them exactly, but I certainly wanted to kind of create a more up-to-date version of them. This is another version which is quite a lot simpler, but this kind of is a good example of the combination of typefaces which I wanted to try and replicate in a modern version. And then, so moving on to the design which I actually created last year, here it is. So, as you can see, the colors in this design are a lot bolder, generally brighter than some of those examples which I just showed you. And particularly the color of the sea there is intended to evoke the alluring, that deep azure color of the Mediterranean in a high summer. And I've also used a different approach for the land heights, where you can see I've used darker shades of sort of a golden brown for higher altitudes. Whoops, gone backwards there. So this, another close-up detail here, shows how in the end, I did combine those two distinctive typeface styles, like the example I showed you. So the bold sans serif font I've used there, Bureau Grotesque, I think is by far my favorite period style sans serif typeface. And it was the perfect choice for the city labels, the river labels, and the beach labels that you see here in blue. Though it took me a little while longer to figure out the perfect serif typeface for the smaller names, I really wanted to try find one which matched quite closely those examples in those 1920s atlases. And in the end, I settled on a typeface called Old Standard and set in italics. And this is one I've returned to again and again subsequently, because I think it's perfect for that kind of period. Now then, the next thing I'd like to show you are the maps of the cities that I've been creating as well. This is the map of the city of Valencia. And this is very much influenced by the classic Baedeker guidebook maps of the earlier 20th century, which have a very distinctive orange color scheme, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with as well. There's a couple of examples here. This one of Lisbon, which dates from 1901, and this one, Pisa in Italy, from 1913. Quite monochrome, but again, that sort of salmon orangey pink used to fill in the background color, which is very distinctive, and it's something which I love myself. So this detail of the Valencia map I just showed you, see how I've replicated that classic Baedeker look. There are a few of my own design twists. Of course, the serif typeface is slightly different to those of the real examples, but then also the main color scheme is more of a peachy terracotta. And this is meant to evoke the color of the rooftops of Spanish cities when you see them from above or from a satellite image. They always appear very, those terracotta tiles they use to decorate well, not decorate, but to cover the roofs is very bold. And that's what I've attempted to do there. And I must say as well, there's also something quite satisfying about the way Valencia, the map of the city kind of fits onto a map onto a sheet as well, where you have the old city centre, which is an almost perfect circular shape, or a heart shape even, right in the centre. And then it's kind of surrounded by these ring roads set at right angles, and the way you have the Turia Gardens, the old riverbed, kind of snaking across it as well. That's there's a certain balance I tried to achieve with the composition of that map on paper. And then I also created a map of Barcelona in the same style. And here I adjusted the orientation slightly, so the grid pattern of the Eixample district, that very distinctive grid that sets Barcelona apart from any other cities. It aligns perfectly with the edges of the map. And the Gran Via de les Corts Catalanes, which is the main avenue, which you can see running just along the top of this detail here, is aligned precisely along the central horizontal axis of the design. So this is kind of my tribute in a way to the vision and the ingenuity of the city's planners, way back at the end of the 19th, start of the 20th centuries. Speaking of city planners, there was an exhibition held at the Ayuntamiento, the city hall here in Valencia, a couple of years ago, all about the Valencian architect called Javier Gulich, who was born in 1886, died in 1972. And he was responsible for many monumental designs and redevelopment projects in Valencia city centre. And many of his architectural drawings were exhibited along with detailed plans for the city's redevelopment in the 20s and 30s, some of which were realized and most of which unfortunately weren't in the end. And these plans with their very distinctive modernist Art Deco stylings were a strong influence on my next series of maps that I began around the same time. Valencia's districts in much bolder, brighter colors that I began around the same time. And so this is one example. In fact, I'm going to show you two examples from this series. This first one is also called L'Eixample, like the one in Barcelona. And this includes the barrio of Ruzafa, in fact, where I live. And this other one here is Pobles Maritims, which is the district that includes Valencia's famous seafront neighborhoods, the municipal beaches, the port area, and the former Grand Prix circuits. And these details show the influence of those plans that I saw at that Gulich exhibition, particularly in this bold typeface that I used for the title card here on the left-hand side, which actually, funnily enough, has an appropriately Spanish-sounding name. It's called Pilar. Again, very evocative of that kind of Art Deco period, 1920s, 1930s. I thought was perfect. And also, the bold colors, but also the shading effect that I added to the blocks that you can see here on the right-hand side. And so finally, I'd like to talk about another map which I completed of the whole peninsula last year, in fact, almost a year ago to the day, my railway map of Spain and Portugal, which is another example of my interest in creating maps in a more modern, early to mid 20th century style. So this, you can't really put your finger exactly in what precisely the period of which this map is inspired by, but I always kind of classify it as basically the first half of the 20th century. To show you a few close-up details, the base map is basically the same as the earlier decorative map I showed everyone near the beginning. But the details such as the road network stripped back and the railway network enhanced with thicker, very bold lines of varying thicknesses, each representing a different type of line. So the thickest lines that you can see here, incidentally, I don't think I've mentioned yet, basically this actually shows a map of the network as it is now, the railway network today. So, it includes the high-speed railway lines that cover a fair part of the country. So these thickest lines here, see here, radiating out here from Santiago de Compostela, for example, in Galicia, those are the high-speed railway lines there. And those which are the thinnest along the coast are the single-track railway lines, which most of which tend to be along the northern coast and also around the Basque Country. And then major cities and interchanges are marked with larger circles, and almost every intermediate stop on the network is shown. I think with a few exceptions, those which are kind of located quite close to the city centres aren't shown. But all those intermediate countryside railway stations are all on there. Although, to be honest, I have no idea how many stations altogether there are that I've drawn on this map. I mean, I never got around to counting, but I'm sure there's easily at least 1,000 little station names on there, at least, quite possibly. And here's just another detail here showing the area around Lisbon in Portugal. And this is another detail just of one of the city maps which are inset in the corner. If I just go back to the whole design there, you can see there, I've got 3 insets of the largest cities, Lisbon, Madrid, and Barcelona, just to show the detail near their centers. So I just wanted to quickly mention a few, again, just a few of the historical maps that influenced this design. So, I mean, these monochrome railway maps from the period demonstrate the bold linear and typographic style I was aiming for. So obviously this one of London and another one here of the Western United States. You know, that was a very particular approach, a design approach to the way that the lines and the stations are shown. That's what I really wanted to try and replicate. But, and also there's another, a couple of examples here that actually originate from Spain from the same period, from around the 1920s or so. But I also really love those kind of maps from the same period, which have that really sort of bold color fills for the different countries and regions. You know, like for example, this example of Trans-Siberian Railway, and also let's extract from a map of Southeast England, where you can see how the railways take precedence, you know, with those bold lines going across the country. So going back to my design, you can see how basically I've tried to combine elements from each of these examples. And it's something that continues to interest me, and I hope to basically replicate a similar design for other countries around the world, possibly. You know, I'm quite keen on doing one of Japan. I had the pleasure of visiting Japan a few years ago, by which I travelled around by railway, and I'd also love to do one of my home country, of course, of Great Britain. That'd be quite a fun design to work on too. But so far, it's just this one. But I'd love if anyone has any suggestions for any other regions or countries that they'd like to see in a similar style. I'd love to hear it. So that's it. So you can see all of the examples that I've shown here tonight on my website, which is www, all the W's, thisismikehall.com. And you can also follow me on Twitter, which is @thisismikehall. So thanks everyone for listening, and yeah, delighted to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mike. I think obviously between your website and Train Tracker, there's not going to be any shortage of geo Christmas gifts this year. So really fantastic. We do have quite a few questions for you, condensing some of them. So what tools are you using to make the maps? Like what software are you using, or how do you do it?
Yeah, sure. Actually, that was something I meant to mention near the beginning. Primarily, I use Adobe Illustrator for pretty much all my digital designs. As I mentioned, I do also use some traditional media, so ink or pencil and paper, and I'll tend to use a bit of Photoshop just to perhaps you know, to scan or touch up the designs or add color. But otherwise, it's generally tends to be Illustrator. Yeah.